Right. All the tech stuff done. We hit record. We got a transcript. We're live on Facebook.
All systems go. Yeah.
Now we can do the fun stuff. So we have people in our webinar this evening, which is fantastic. Lovely. People are saying it's their first time hearing myself and Eoin talk. It's amazing. Oh, someone else saying fourth training with us. Amazing. Fantastic. Brilliant. So I'm here this evening with Eoin Stephens. Eoin, I'll let you do a little intro to yourself, if that's okay, and talk about people. And I'm Evaleen. I run Awesome Training. So myself and Eoin have collaborated a good bit over the past few years now, doing different webinars and talks and things. And I suppose we're very much aware of the need for better mental health services or supports for autistic people, and that's what we're going to talk about this evening. So, and we hope that everyone here will, in the webinar with us, will join in and you know, ask us questions and have some input into the chat as well. Brilliant. Okay. I've heard of Eoin's wisdom regularly.
Oh, there you are now.
That's lovely.
Yeah, no pressure. So.
Oh, brilliant. And there's somebody here who was at the school talk recently as well. Brilliant. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And anyone watching us on Facebook, welcome. Thank you. So, Eoin, will I hand over to you to just maybe introduce yourself and we can.
So I work as a counsellor and psychotherapist. I've a background in various things, worked with people with intellectual disabilities, worked in addiction counselling, addiction treatment. I've lectured in the field of counselling and psychotherapy, but now primarily private practice, and you know, I love this kind of training work as well and spreading the word. And I'm autistic. You know, 10 years ago or so, realised that. Been feeling my way into what we're talking about tonight, because you know, I was working a bit as a counsellor in private practice, though mostly in the lecturing side. 10 years ago I was in the field that we're talking about tonight, and I'm certainly well in it now. But you know, I quite slowly felt my way into doing a lot of work with autistic people, partly because of my own need just to catch up on what it meant to be autistic myself, which you know is a long enough lifetime job at whatever age, but also, and again, this connects with our general discussion this evening, also, in a sense, it's just, I'm not sure how to put this, but there wasn't a lot happening. I mean, of course, there was a lot happening, as in there was as many autistic people in the world as there is now and always has been, but there was not many people really talking about it in relation to counselling, and you know, not many people of my clients identifying themselves as autistic, and I wouldn't have quite had. It was only developing the confidence of maybe trying to guess at that a bit myself and have a strong sense of it and a strong hypothesis that I'd feel safe to bring to a client. So, however, and again, this brings us to what we're talking about this evening, you know, the mental health issues that affect autistic people, and then, you know, what services there are and aren't and need to be. The last few years, you know, that has completely changed around for me. Meeting yourself, Evaleen, by the way, was one of the catalysts. There was a few, but you know, it was fantastic, that conference in early 2019, you know, just to actually physically see an autistic community, you know, was wonderful, I think, for a lot of us. And then, yeah, I just started to, if you like, come out within my own profession. And since then, the last couple of years, and, you know, again, online work, I think, has facilitated this, interestingly enough. I have, if you like, realized what became my ambition. My ambition was to largely work with autistic clients. And now I largely work with autistic clients. I must count it up sometime, but I'd say 90% of the people I meet in the course of the week in my work are autistic adults, and I love it. It's exciting, it's interesting, it's you know, we have that great autistic click a lot of the time, and we don't have the double empathy problem, and you know, we you know, can just dive in and do the work in a straight kind of way. But there's loads of work to be done. So, you know, that's me segueing from talking about me into what we're talking about this evening. I mean, I suppose I might just kick off a point, Evaleen, if that's okay, just to get us started. I mean, we all know this, I think, here, but I think it's worth saying, and it only becomes clearer to me the more work I do with autistic people in a mental health kind of setting, a counselling setting, and that is, of course, the problem is not being autistic. The problem, the mental health problem, isn't being autistic. The social, cultural, societal problem can being autistic, but being autistic is not a mental health problem. And of course, we might talk a little bit more about that now, about like what do we struggle with, what are the issues. But of course, it also links into what we need to come back to, which is the whole thing about services. Of course, in a lot of services, a lot of formal, state mental health services, autism is seen as a mental health issue. So it's like, there's not even enough of the wrong services for it.
That's it.
So maybe I'll hand it back to you there, Evaleen, having just, maybe thrown that ball out into the field,
Yeah, I mean, I suppose this is kind of what I had to unpack as well for myself, on my journey, I suppose 8 years ago, this idea that like anxiety and depression just go hand in hand with being autistic. And that's kind of where we were all left, and I suppose now when we start unpacking that, we're seeing that, well, no. And I mean, like, anxiety is a response to the environment. So how could your neurotype, that's like saying being neurotypical causes your mental health issues. It's not your neurotype, So again, it is kind of unpacking that. I think firstly for autistic people, because there are so many of us who kind of believe these things as well, because we've been told and because we've spent our lives thinking we're to blame for everything, really, I mean, so some of us kind of accept these things, like, I accepted that I had all these difficulties with socializing in the beginning, and then I kind of unpacked that a bit more, and but I mean, I think saying autism or being autistic, whatever wording you want to use, causes mental health problems for people is just probably the most unhelpful thing, because that means people's needs aren't being recognized, and it's kind of like, we can't do anything about it. We just need to learn to cope with these levels of anxiety. And it's like, well, I don't want to cope with anxiety. I want to alleviate it. I want to go on, to be honest. But I mean, it's a normal part of being human, having some anxiety, but high levels of anxiety, of second guessing yourself, all the things that come with it, it's very hard to cope with that. I don't even think it's realistic to learn to cope with it. Do you think it's realistic, actually, to kind of learn to cope with these things on a daily basis?
Well, we're only human. That's what it boils down to, I think, so it's not realistic to expect, humans just as a default to cope with massive levels of pressure and stress and confusion and trauma, as we know. We might come back to that, and anxiety. I mean, in actual fact, if you take the term neurodiversity in its broadest sense, which just means that everybody's got a slightly different brain, then there's lots of ways in which human brains are diverse. And actually, one way in which they're diverse, this isn't now necessarily to do with autistic and non-autistic. It's just some people are a little more resilient to stress and anxiety, and some are less so, but that doesn't cut across that doesn't go with being neurotypical, being autistic, so all we can ever say is, well, we're going to find out how much stress and anxiety this individual can stand, because we'll see the results, and there's always a limit, though. There has to be a limit. We're all...
I mean, it totally depends on your starting point. If you're a person who's got high self-esteem, lots of confidence, grew up in a loving, caring environment, haven't had a whole lot of negativity, you're kind of set up, you're starting off stronger than somebody.
And there's a touch of genetic luck in there as well, like with any neurology, there's a touch of that, it's not fair, but there is, but then...
No. And I mean, that's an interesting point, how we pass all these things on through generations as well. And it's like, well, at what generation do we stop this? Do we try and stop passing it on as well?
But I suppose the bit maybe that's, as we talk it out, that's the image in my head is almost like that, the wrong sort of mental health approach is to meet the person who's looking for help, the client, the patient, whatever the context is, to meet, their depression or anxiety or complex post-traumatic stress symptoms, or pattern of struggling, with relationships, or eating disorder, whatever it might be, that does fall into a mental health context, to meet that with a frown, that is appropriate. We should be thinking concerned, a concerned face, as in, right, problem, I hope I can help you. But then the person is autistic, that shouldn't be also met with a frown and a concerned face and, oh God, that makes you, and they're autistic as well. Oh God, I hope we can help you with that. Like that should be met probably with a smile even, it's certainly neutral. But I mean, from my point of view, working with people, yeah, I'm deeply concerned about the struggles they have in their lives. And we're really trying to solve those things, but we're trying to rehabilitate their sense of being autistic as the best place to work from. The only best place to work from anyone is their true self. What was it you were saying recently about, you came up with something, we were saying you should turn it into a meme there the other day about
oh yeah, when people say don't let your autism define you, which was said
yeah.
to a young person I know by a therapist, like, don't let your autism define you. And I was like, don't let who you are define you.
Don't let your real self define you. Exactly.
Yeah, it's like,
so I think this is the bit, you see, it's one of the main things I think that we wanted to put out there this evening and keep putting out is that that's, people have got that all wrong, and a lot of mental health services and mental health professionals still have that all wrong. I mean, we're trying to get that message out and gradually put it right, and lots of people are listening to that message, but lots of people who have been in the profession a long time and have learned what they've learned and have kept doing it, and the people around them are still doing it, and what they learned about autism they learned 30 years ago, and they haven't felt any great need to read anything in the meantime, then I think that they're really missing that piece that if I really want to help this person, the best way I can help them is address those problematic areas that are genuine mental health problems, and they come out slightly differently, perhaps sometimes in autistic people. We might talk a little about that, but the best way I can help this person is also begin to help them put back together a good solid sense of the autistic people they are, because that's a resource and a strength. It's not something that's going to get in the way. It's fantastic once you start to see that coming together.
But, I mean, that sense of self, I think that, like the I talk about, like if someone's has that strong sense of self growing up, it's our only defense in this world, really. It's probably our best defense is to have that really strong relationship with yourself, that you don't care what other people think of you. And I don't mean in a narcissistic way, or that you don't care about people, that kind of stuff. I mean in a way that what other people think about you doesn't matter, and I suppose it is very much, I think, especially when you find out you're autistic, and actually finding out you're autistic in adulthood, but also people who found out they were autistic younger, because we do have this kind of fragmented sense of self. So it is about kind of patching us up, putting us back together, and actually seeing ourselves for who we are, because that's denied us, I just feel, on so many levels. And people always, kind of, we always feel like we're missing the mark, or letting people down, or people are quick to tell us that we're not doing things right, or all of this kind of stuff. And I think that's probably is that, well, I suppose I'm imagining things, you tell me.
I touched on that.
That kind of the biggest,
yeah, when we did that fundraising piece for Ukrainian neurodivergent people, I did a talk, and they're available somewhere. I think it's probably on my YouTube anyway, if anyone's interested. But it's about developmental trauma and lack of healthy mirroring, and it's like autistic people can experience plenty of horrific overt bullying and criticism, and being forced down various tracks that just don't suit them and so on. And that's the relatively obvious stuff, but all autistic people, unless they're extraordinarly lucky and exceptional. I've heard of a few examples of where this hasn't happened for various reasons much, but other than that, autistic people, by the very nature of being neurodivergent, it applies with being having ADHD as well, will have multiple small to not so small invalidations all the time, every day, even from people who care about them and who mean well by them, because what happens is just not being understood, and you can't mirror somebody properly if you don't properly understand who they are. So with the best will in the world, young, like autistic children will come up with an idea, but it'll be off the normal track because they're autistic. Might be a good idea, might not, but it'll be an interesting one. But of course, the reaction they'll get often won't be, that's an interesting idea. It's like, you what? All right, yeah, okay, that's a bit off track. And they can see the frowns, and they can see the puzzlement, or their style of humor is very different from other people. So people don't laugh when they make a joke, and they don't quite laugh when other people do. And it's all those little things that just eat away, as you say, at a solid sense of self.
Constant. I mean, everybody has, and that's the thing. People say, "Oh, put up with negativity." We all have negativity. It's like, yes, but how much negativity? And
not necessarily about who you are, not about, these are just core parts of who we are, And
it starts so early on. I mean, as babies, basically, because as you mentioned, the piece you did for Ukraine, which it is on YouTube. It's on. I watched it yesterday. Social mirroring. It was really good. But Joanna, who's running the help in Poland for the Ukrainian refugees. I don't know if you saw that before, but it was her piece on like how children and babies don't get that social feedback as well, which is very similar, I think, to what you did a talk on it from Autistic. I think you might have come to that. Yeah. So when I was listening to you, I was like, it's very, very similar. It's like literally if kids are expressing their emotions in a different way, and they're not getting validated, and then we wonder why we don't understand our feelings, or why.
That's it. Yeah. And just a couple of people are actually asking questions there in the chat, and it might be no harm to just if I respond away, because we'll end up talking about other things. Somebody saying that they've two boys with special needs. Eilish is saying one accepts he's autistic, the other boy wants to avoid knowing that he has special needs. I feel my boy that avoids accepting who he really is struggles mentally. I mean, this is one thing I've noticed, is that there isn't a magic solution that we assess everybody and diagnose everyone and discover who's autistic, and then everything falls into place, because maybe in a wonderful future world that'll be the case. But at the moment, of course, it's very stigmatized and very confusing, and people aren't necessarily delighted to think that they're different. And it's also difficult to be different, particularly as a child and an adolescent. So I can understand how he might feel that way, and I suppose that's one thing to mirror back to him, is we can understand how he feels that way, while also I agree with you that it may serve him well as time goes by to be able to accept more of who he is. But the world is not entirely his friend there. You are, but the world isn't. So it's not all about parents. I mean, parents are a huge part of this, obviously the biggest part, but it's not all about parents. And he may well know that the world doesn't entirely mirror this back to him. It just means you need to mirror it with all the energy you have, and as best as you can. If you don't mind me saying, we there's lots of delicacy around language nowadays, and I suppose special needs is perhaps a term that might not serve him well. And the problem is a lot of people use that term nowadays and mean well by it. But in actual fact, for youngsters, it doesn't mean something very good, so it's a delicate area, that. And somebody else says, Diego says, as a father, how to know if I'm acting this way with my kid. Well, the first thing is to really, really try and understand your kid as best as possible. And I presume we're preaching to the converted to some extent here tonight. The very fact that you're concerned about that means you're probably getting as much of it right as most people can. Nobody can do it perfectly, but it really is just about what's the ideal world, or what is it you need to try to be doing. If just everybody with a child thought, I need to find out who this child is, not decide in advance who they should be, I just need to meet this stranger and find out who they are and how they think, and let their self emerge, So, if you just listen and give permission for different ways of being and are curious about your child, it'll go as well as it will go. And the world, unfortunately, plays its place as well, Do you want to say anything about that, Evaleen, while we're on it?
I suppose just on the first one, just about self-acceptance. It's such a key part of, I think, like you have to accept yourself, really, don't you, before other people, will. And it is important, especially for young people, I think, too. But it is how it's delivered. It is the kind of language around it. It is. I'm not saying this was delivered badly or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, the actual narrative and the words people are using.
All around, you see, this
is it. Like, and I mean, you know, there is no such thing as special needs. We all have human needs. Everybody needs support. Every single one of us. I went through a phase thinking I didn't need support. I didn't want to go to a support group because I was like, I don't need support, you know, because I'm so self-sufficient. And then I had to, you know, realize actually, yeah, of course I do. And it comes and looks in different ways for different people, and it changes across your lifespan. And all of us need accommodations, and all of us need support, and all of us need those things. So why are we labeling like some things special and other things? And what we're doing in that scenario is we're kind of othering people unintentionally. And this is the thing, because we're unaware of what we're doing a lot of the time. And once we become aware, we might like it for a bit, and we might have to come to terms with it. But we at least, you know, kind of understand that we're seeing people as these people are other, are different to us. And when we do that, we're actually creating a lot of difficulties in those people's lives and barriers between us, because we're kind of saying those people aren't like us. And we start thinking that way. And that's why language is so important. And we have to be careful about how we use it. And, you know, it's the same in schools and classrooms. And we have, you know, it's even kind of when people say like, oh, this is my colleague and this is my female colleague. It's like, what? Like, just colleagues, you know what I mean? It's like, what if we point out people's differences? So like, I'd be very much about explaining, I mean, kind of how I explain stuff. And I have like a new book for kids called Exploring My Neurodivergence, or Embracing My Neurodivergence even. And it is kind of explaining that there's a majority of people and they communicate and think kind of similarly, and this is what they do. But we are part of a minority, and there's just less of us, and it takes, you know, less time to find each other, and we're part of a minority. And that's how I describe it. I don't talk about like deficits or anything like that, you know, because I think it is really, really important how we go about that. I have one question on Facebook, Owen, about the top 3 services you'd like to see in Ireland.
Oh, wow.
If you could just have a magic wand now, Owen, what would you make appear tomorrow, let's say?
Well, I mean, I suppose I'll put in one and you can put in one, and then we'll see who did the third one. I mean, I think that, you know, what was going through my head as you were talking there was similar to what I was thinking earlier, which is that, you know, we need to stop thinking, and the mental health services need to stop thinking we've got depression, anxiety. Oh, now we've got another problem, they're autistic as well. We need to start thinking, oh, now we've made a useful discovery, they're autistic as well. You know, so being autistic is just a useful thing to find out. Equally useful, by the way, to find out you're not autistic. Do you know what I mean? It's just to find out who you are, and then you work with that. So I think that some sort of service that wasn't mental health, mental illness focused, but there was focused on the kind of, you know, I'm trying to piece this out of my mind even, you know, because it's an interesting question. If you really had the ideal, that would be much more sort of discovering your best personality focused, you know, where people, you know, at different stages of their lives, I think, you know, that could be partly connected to the education system a little bit for when you're at that age, you know, but that isn't, you know, it's like psychological assessment in the sense of just pure educational needs, and isn't, you know, CAMS because you know, for mental health problems. And similarly for adults, you know, that wouldn't be just about, well, you have to break down before you go to this service. It's just where you could go, and there would be people who would be capable of helping you figure out more of who you are and what you want. And then what could come into that, along with a whole lot of other things, would be, oh my God, I went to that service and I discovered I'm autistic, and it was really helpful because then they also told me what was useful about that and what was I would find difficult, and explained a whole lot of things. And by the way, I decided I'd go to a therapist as well, because I realized I'm carrying a lot of anxiety around that. But I just discovered more of who I am, rather than having to go under mental health, mental illness. Now that's a huge piece as well, and we should come back to it, you know, because autistic people, for a whole lot of reasons, are carrying lots of things, lots of depression and anxiety and trauma. But somewhere where psychological expertise could be used for something other than waiting until people, you know, fall down holes and have to be pulled out again, you know. So if that makes some kind of sense, anything you would, that would be the one that would occur to me straight off. What about you, Evaleen?
Oh, I don't know. There's just so much. And
I
I
mean,
suppose my ideal is like where we don't need services at all, where
yeah,
we all just live in harmony
yeah, I
and
know.
meet each other with compassion and stop competing and realizing that we have to compete, or thinking that we have to compete with each other when we don't. Yeah, it's hard, I suppose. Because I know this came up before, you know, kind of like, obviously, yes, people need to understand what it means to be autistic and what things autistic people face and other neurodivergent people, actually any minority really, you know. And I mean, if you have a client who's coming and if someone, then you have an understanding of the trauma that they've been through. So I don't, yeah, I'm like, I don't, it's hard to kind of pick three. It's a great question, and I just,
It's a great question. Yeah,
it's like I wish we had wish we had the power to do something. But I mean, I
yeah,
suppose I think services for adults include things like peer support, hugely important. I definitely think having mental health professionals up to speed.
yeah. Well, that's
So they're not saying things to clients like, that don't let your autism define you, or they're not wondering why you have autism, or you know what I mean, these kind of questions,
yeah.
or
So
that this is a problem, or they're gaslighting you over and over because you've already had a lifetime of that, and you don't want someone telling you that you're imagining that all these people are doing things to you, or that you're, you know what I mean, that you're getting all this negativity. And so it's, yeah, I mean,
well, I mean,
it's more the type of services, the
yeah,
type of support, I think
yeah,
needs to change. That's kind of why that question, I was kind of taking time to
yeah,
formulate in my head. It's the quality of services
yeah.
that people need. And look, I just think we have a crisis in Ireland. I just don't think people, I mean, our health system isn't working for a lot of people. Our mental health support just doesn't seem to be there. You know what I mean? And it's just, and I mean, in our autistic community, we definitely have a mental health crisis. I think we should be using those words. I mean, estimates are around 80% of us have high anxiety or anxiety disorders, which are, you know, what is it? Something like 60% depression and 40% nearly PTSD, like from, you know, living, like that's not okay. It's not acceptable. And it's definitely not acceptable for people to think it's because we're autistic. And I suppose that is the narrative, you know, and it is changing, thankfully, but like, these things, it's like, oh, autistic people have anxiety because they're autistic. Autistic people have depression because they're autistic. It's like, what kind of thinking is that? That's not scientific thinking. That's just like very, very lazy. It's like, if an autistic person is hungry, is that caused by their own by them being autistic? You know, it's like, how far do we go with this? But there was something else you said now I wanted to join in on, but I can't remember exactly. Oh no, there was a question about peer support, because there was a question for somebody in the chat. There is a wonderful community group on Facebook called Neuropride Ireland. So if you look up Neuropride Ireland, I'll tag them on our Facebook page later, actually, under the comments. They have a public page, but they also have a community group, and there's a lot of people organizing like offline events and as well as online events and different things like that, because a lot of people are lonely. Simple as that, Owen, isn't it? It's like mental health services will do so
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know,
I mean,
getting the right sorts of therapy and counseling will do, you know, so
yeah,
much. But you also need to, that whole mirroring, see yourself in other people.
Yeah. I mean, you know, in a way we can probably, you know, talk about, you know, that mirroring again for a moment, and it helps us to partly answer some of those questions. It's like, yeah, you know, I think it's absolutely vital that when somebody who's autistic meets a professional, that they don't get more unhealthy mirroring, they get healthy mirroring. Of course, yeah, the family is absolutely crucial, as we've been talking about. You know, but I mean, school is a big part of children's lives, so you know, where teachers come into all of this is absolutely massive as well. But you know, some of the healthy mirroring that you know autistic people can get is definitely from other autistic people. There's absolutely no doubt about it, because what you get is, yeah, I get that, yeah, that makes sense to me, yeah, I feel that way as well, yeah, absolutely, know exactly what you mean, yeah, you know, I mean, that's just like water in the desert, I think, for a lot of autistic people. until you start to get a reasonable amount of it. And then it's just water, which is also pretty vital, even if you're not in the desert. But in the early days, I think, I certainly experienced that sense of being able to bounce off and mirror off other autistic people.
Oh, it's so important. I mean, like, how do we know who we are? How do we know how we exist at all if we're not mirrored in other people, really? Maria's just saying about adding in the ACEs trauma. Yeah, I mean, that's it. You see, but this is the problem, because autistic people are literally othered within like an inch of our lives. We're not seen as the same as the rest of humanity, because that's what othering, it's like literally put these people in this category and autism causes all their problems, instead of like, well, hang on, they're human beings. And I suppose that's what we do at Awesome Training, is like, we apply what we already know to human beings to autistic people, and then, well, what do you see? You see a very, very different picture. And like ACEs, when I remember reading about that years ago, I was like, ACEs scores in childhood, and I was like, but here's the information. This is why autistic people, have these. This is, even medical conditions and all this kind of stuff that are linked to early childhood trauma. I'm like, why are we not talking about this? Why is nobody looking at this? And it's quite frustrating, because it means people aren't getting their needs met. People are hurting. At the end, we're talking about people being in pain, whether that's emotional pain, physical pain, or it's pain, and that's not, I suppose, the way we should be living. And
I think that, and that links into what Paul is saying as well. Autistic people have depression, anxiety, because they're not being accepted for their autism, and the world doesn't accept them. So up against a harder world. I mean, that's absolutely, that's Luke Bearden's key point as well, a great writer and speaker on all of this, autism plus environment equals outcome, it's absolutely crucial to all that we're saying here this evening. But I just wanted to link back to a comment that's just a little further back there from Dee. I think we need more neurodivergent professionals working as therapists instead of having to work with the ideals of those who are neurotypical. You see, that brings us back to that whole mirroring thing, obviously, hopefully you have a better chance as an autistic person, even as a neurodivergent person who maybe is ADHD, you'll even still have a better chance of getting well mirrored by someone else who's neurodivergent, even if their neurodivergence is different. Partly because, of just, both being kind of outside a bit, but partly because you both will be able to understand what we've just been talking about, not the neurology of being autistic or having ADHD, but the experience of being autistic and ADHD. So, that's huge.
And obviously we're talking a lot about mirroring, but it is so important, and it's like, that's why time with other autistic people, like whether you're 10 or 4 or 40 or 90, it's really important to have time with other people, neurodivergent people, in general as well. I mean, even when I found out I was autistic, I look back over my life and I was like, oh, most of my close friends were definitely neurodivergent in some way, you know what I mean? But what was my point? Oh yes, so this idea, even the way we use body language, the way we're talking about not being validated, it doesn't, and that it doesn't have to be intentional. It's literally like, if autistic people are, if I fold my arms because I'm comfortable and I want to talk to Eoin, and then Eoin reads that as some sort of subliminal signal I'm trying to send him that I don't want to talk to him and I'm closed off, which you'll read in a body language book. He's misread me. There's literally just a miscommunication there. Same things happen when, so our body language isn't about sending signals to other people. It's literally kind of our comfort, or expressing ourselves, or, this kind of thing that I do all the time when I'm talking, to get the words out. It's part of my speech. Literally, movement is part of my speech. So it's all of those little things, isn't it? And then not only do we kind of not get mirrored, but then we often get judged in those situations. Misinterpretation, and miscommunication, and even though the story around our communication is changing, we know now that autistic people communicate really well with other autistic people. There's still, even people who kind of have read that research are still saying things like autistic people have difficulty reading social cues, and I'm like, the neurotypes that's not where the difficulties arise. It's in the space between us, and that's what we need to work on. You know what I mean? It's not that we have these difficulties just because we don't understand the cues. So there's just, there's so much to it, really. And
communication is the key problem to solve, in a way. And again, that brings us back to, we're not going to solve it all right now, and there isn't a simple answer at the end of all of this. But one thought that did occur to me in terms of the what brings us here this evening is that things change. If they change at all, they change slowly, but if they change by people looking for something different, when they go to a service and expecting it at some level and being unhappy that it isn't there. But to do that, we have to know what we're unhappy about and what we think should be there and look for it. And I think, we're touching into some of that this evening. And again, I think that's the message to keep getting out to people. This is what you should be expecting. You shouldn't be expecting a frown from a professional when it's discovered your child is autistic as well as has an eating disorder. You should be expecting aha. Right, great. Now we're getting somewhere, because now we can work properly with them, should we be expecting more, if you like, openly neurodivergent professionals or more professionals who know their neurodivergent? Absolutely. I mean, really, like anything else, it should sort of probably match the general population. So there's, for psychologists and therapists and doctors and so on, people have that option. I don't think it's absolutely essential for, for instance, autistic people only to work with autistic therapists. I do think that every single therapist should have an awareness around autism, and I'm doing my best to achieve that single-handedly in Ireland between now and the day I die, but hopefully sooner. But yeah,
single-handedly, Eoin, aren't we?
Yeah, I know. I'd be very happy for other people to be part of it. But if no one else is going to do it, then I'll do it. A few other people have been starting to do a bit of it as well. But I'm certainly doing it.
I suppose, because you're into autism awareness, because we have problems now as well, because we have people who are doing autism awareness or think they're autism aware. I think that's having like a sensory box that you can fidget with and and turn off the lights, and it's like that's not autism aware. That's and like it's the, again, I suppose it's like the services, it's the quality of people's understanding and the training and the insights that they have, like the depth of their understanding is really important, because we do have a lot of kind of like what I would call like facade kind of marketing terms being used, in all different, like whether it's shopping centers or therapists, whatever, it's kind of all over the place, in schools and everything.
Autism friendly,
autism friendly. But then, like, I'll talk to them, they're like, because we need to model behavior. I'm like, how can you be autism friendly school and think that modeling behavior is what autistic kids need? You know what I mean? And it's just like, so we have a lot of that kind of stuff going on as well. So sometimes I think it's easier if people know nothing, because it's nearly like you're starting.
In a way, and to start from scratch. In some ways that's I mean, in a way, I suppose if people know nothing, are happy to doubt what they know and just say, okay, maybe I just need to look at it again from scratch. But the problem is, if you have already learned something, you're less likely to think that. You're probably more likely to think, well, I learned about autism in that module on my course 20 years ago, and Dee is saying, create specific training for therapists as a module. Absolutely. I would certainly be putting that message out there. There's a few of us trying to start to work on this at the moment, putting the message out to accrediting bodies for therapists and colleges and so on. Change is slow, but we're putting that message out that this needs to happen, because this is not some small kind of territory of work. I mean, I remember, it reminds me, I was thinking there when I was not long that long qualified as a therapist, but I was reasonably established. I suppose I was 7 or 8 years into working as a therapist, and I was beginning to do a little bit of lecturing as well. I remember sitting in with the class I was lecturing in, some skills or whatever, but they had invited in somebody who I also knew slightly through committees and things like that. This was sort of late 90s. Had invited in a therapist, a gay man also, who taught awareness around the whole LGBTQ area, though there probably wasn't called the LGBTQ area in those days. It was just awareness of homosexuality and being gay, and he was coming in to teach the students about this awareness, and I stuck around because I was interested, and it was fascinating, because it was this kind of like a little bit like what we're talking about at the moment. It's like the very fact that he was in talking about it from his point of view was almost slightly weird. He was kind of saying, like, I'm not here to tell you about a problem for a start. It's not a problem being gay. You're a therapist. You don't have to fix people being gay. So why are we even talking about it? I'm not talking about something that's particularly hard to understand. It's just like, I like men, some men like women. Do you know what I mean? Like what's so complicated about that? It's not about, you know, some sort of deep psychological issue, you know. It's just like, you know, you grow up, and he put out this question. He said, I'd like you to explore, at what point did you realize you were heterosexual? You know, and he said, it's just the same question as for me. What point did I realize I was homosexual? About the time that I realized I was sexual. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was all that kind of, he was fascinating. I mean, he was a great guy. He passed away since, sadly. Carl Bartley was his name. They've named an award after him in the IACP. Fantastic guy, you know, full of directness and just honesty, and just pushing people to say, this is not something that I should even have to come in and talk about it, you know, but I'm going to, because I probably have to, but you should just know. And if you don't know, just go and talk to some gay people if you're not gay yourself, you know, and find out what it's like not to be gay, because it's not that complicated, but what it's like to grow up gay still, even in the 90s in Ireland. That's all you need to know about. Like, that's all it is, you know. And so it really reminds me a bit of that. It's like, this isn't even terribly hard to understand, nor is it rare, nor has it ever been rare, you know. And so it's like, yeah, there's that sense that we should be, coming back to what we're talking about this evening, we should be demanding that of professionals, who should be saying, why are you not up to date on all of this? And you know, really, can I talk to someone else then if you're not up to date on it? Because it's not that complicated, you know. Sorry for the rant.
It's fine. Ranting's good.
It is, sure. I'm autistic, yeah.
I don't have any slides to get through. I'm totally fine. I'm like,
yeah,
take as much time as you need.
exactly.
No pressure. I love these kind of chats.
Yeah, but it's like, we need to be impatient, you know, like he was saying, you know, like, this isn't complicated, and I shouldn't even have to tell you about it, and you shouldn't even be lapping it up as if it's some great news. You should just be going out and finding out about this. It's not a secret, folks, you know. Now, having said that, the internet was only really coming into its own in those days. It's even more true now. Nobody has any excuse not to understand this stuff and not to be updated around it. You know, like, a couple of hours in the right place on the internet, and you'll have caught up on a fair chunk of what we now understand around being autistic. And if you watch awesome trainings videos, you'll have all the rest. So, you know, it's not that hard.
Get the thing, we just have so much information around us. And this is not like, you know, I mean, I say to people all the time, like, for a while, I kind of was okay with that narrative that, you know, it takes so long for, you know, 20, 30 years for stuff to filter down into college courses. And I'm like, actually, no, especially after that good practice.
Not good enough, no.
It's not good enough.
Yeah.
And people are, you know what I mean? If that's your job to put together something, then you go get the information. I knew nothing 8 years ago. I knew nothing. I don't know this stuff because I'm autistic. I know this stuff because I went about learning about it, and, you know, being discerning about it as well. And I suppose looking at the sources and kind of comparing and analyzing and going, which actually this stuff makes more sense, and who should I listen to? Because there is that kind of contradictory stories, you know, depending on who you're listening to. So it is all around us. And I mean, I think you're right, Eoin, when you're saying to people, you know, kind of to know what to look for, and to expect it, because, like, actually,
to complain.
Child, adults who have children in their care, whether it's in school or wherever, we have a duty of care to children as adults. Like, we've got volumes written on this. We've child protection laws. We've Children First Act in Ireland. We've all of these things. We've a duty of care to the children. So actually, we've an obligation. That means we've got an obligation to children in our society. That's it, you know what I mean? And we need to start realizing that and doing better. But it also means for adults, you know, if you're going to college, you're supposed to have the same access as other people. If you're going into a job, this environment is supposed to be as good for you as it is for other people. And, you know, we've kind of built this world that has excluded so many different people, just left loads of us on the margins. So we're all trying to get back in. And it seemed like, first of all, like someone's doing a good thing. Like, you know, we're doing a good thing if we're opening our shop, or, you know, making it sensory friendly or also friendly for an hour a week. I'm like, really? An hour a week, and we're supposed to be jumping out of our seats clapping about this? You know, I mean, that's not, and also it's not like we should be delighted with scraps that someone's doing us a favor. Same kind of thing when it comes to education. You know, it is very much like, I mean, we use the word accommodations, and I suppose, you know, we have to use some words, obviously. But like, all we're doing is facilitating equality. That's literally what we're doing, because we didn't facilitate equality, you know, for so many years, decades. And actually, we're just doing it now. We're trying to catch up on all of this. So it's not something to be celebrated. You shouldn't be getting a plaque on your wall if you're hiring somebody with special needs. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I was in a hotel, this is a few years ago, and they had like plaques on their wall, and I was just like, could you imagine having a plaque on a wall because you hired a woman or somebody from a different race or someone from a different religion, and you got a plaque for it? Like, I was just going, but we don't see how we see difference and disability, and how discriminatory, I suppose, our attitudes are towards that, like, right now. And it's not good enough, you know. And I think it is time people, you know, I suppose, started having those expectations, you know. But that's hard if you're worn down, if you're getting no at every corner, whether you're a parent or not, or, you know, whatever, an autistic adult. It's hard to kind of keep going with all of that, you know. So
Yeah, and actually, just something I wanted to, I did think earlier that I wanted to, you know, mention this evening is just that it ties in with what you were saying there about children, you know, because, you know, children are amongst the people that we classify as vulnerable. Now, everyone in the world is vulnerable. But when we say children and vulnerable adults, you know, we mean people who could easily be taken advantage of and who need our support and not our undermining, and not to be put in danger but kept safe, and not to have their heads filled with rubbish but filled with proper stuff, you know. And of course there are vulnerable adults, and vulnerable adults sometimes means, you know, people with, you know, things like learning disabilities, for instance, intellectual disability, but it can cover elderly people, particularly maybe people with dementia, things like that. It's a broad term, but there's a certain way in which, and I'm talking about adults here, and I'm talking about my field in therapy, but also things like psychiatry and you know, mental health services. You know, neurodivergent people are vulnerable adults. They're vulnerable, first of all, for a very simple reason. Everyone who looks for help is vulnerable. You know, so it's not just neurodivergent people. Every client in therapy, every patient of a doctor or of a psychiatrist is vulnerable. We are needy, we're unsure of ourselves, we're depressed, we're struggling, we're vulnerable because we need this person. But I think there are particular vulnerabilities that come with being not just someone who has grown up confused and uncertain and invalidated and disimpaired, but who is also, particularly, you might think it would help if you know you're autistic, but in fact, someone who belongs to a minority that is stigmatized and seen in a very distorted way, so that when you know, tell a therapist that I'm autistic, it nearly makes you more vulnerable potentially, unless you've got the right person. If you've got the wrong person, you're vulnerable to all their great theories about autism, which now get imposed on you. So I did want to just throw in that term, vulnerable. That's where what the concern is about here, is that when people need help, they actually become more vulnerable. And that's the crisis that you were talking about earlier, you know, is that there's more and more autistic people in need of help, and what's matching that is terrifying, you know, simple lack of help and services and affordable services. And then when people crawl their way and pull their way through to some sort of service, it can be at best, you know, sometimes good, often at best just all right, and sometimes absolutely damaging.
absolutely. I have friends who were like traumatized basically,
Yeah,
by their experiences. I
yeah,
mean,
adults and children I'm talking about now, you know.
yeah.
Yeah, just absolutely damaging, you know,
Um,
make things worse.
Absolutely. Someone is just asking questions about gender and kind of the intersectionality between trans people and autistic people. So actually, it's really not my area, but we're actually doing a talk, webinar on it in June. It's called Autism, Sex and Gender, with Katie. What's Katie's surname? Monday. And this is their area, so I'm really looking forward to it as well, so I can learn about it more. So yeah, and that's the thing, it's like people are autistic, but they're also multiply neurodivergent, may have medical conditions, you know, maybe belong to another minority, because obviously the intersectionality and all that. So it's yeah, it's an interesting conversation we're having, Owen, because I'm just, you know, those things should be everybody should know those kind of things about intersectionality, about all that stuff.
Yeah,
When
that's
they
it.
hear someone
Yeah.
say, I'm autistic, it
Yeah.
might be, you know, and trauma, like that's literally the first few things that should
Yeah.
come into someone's head is, you know,
yeah. To you know, to get really good with any particular area and really confident with it, yeah, it does take time, but to get the basics, I mean, you know, I do currently, for the last couple of years, I've been running a few times a year, 2 half days for therapists, you know, a package of 2 half-day webinars, an introductory and a follow-up. And, you know, like in that time, like 4 hours and 4 hours, you know, like we can cover just, you know, the basic stuff that they need a feel of to go out and learn more, and to meet autistic clients without the wrong stuff in their heads and with the basics of the right stuff. Now, there's a lot more, you know, again, to get really, really good at mirroring autistic people and really getting a feel for how we operate. And, you know, for instance, I mean, I'm on that learning curve myself. For instance, I've been my recent special interest has been special interests. You know, I've been just engaging in that area with lots of clients and finding just how rich it is to engage with people, you know, not just on the problems in their lives, but on the things they're excited about, you know. So there's lots to learn. On that note, of course, as you mentioned in your in the chat there, Evaleen, we're running a 10-day training in the autumn and through to the spring. First one in Ireland for therapists and other helping professionals, because yeah, obviously we're trying to not just talk the talk but walk the walk, and we have a good response. I have to say that, like, people are signing up for it. So there are professionals, there are therapists out there who want even more than the couple of short webinars. They want to really immerse themselves in this and try and find out properly how to help the autistic clients who come to see them, yeah, or who might want to, you know. So that's something, but there's more to be done, a lot more to do, you know.
There's a lot more to do, but I suppose it's kind of how we start and how we go about it. And I suppose, yeah, I mean, as you said, Eoin, we're running our 10-day course, CPD course for helping professionals from October, starting in October. We were going to take 25. There's only 8 places left, which is amazing. Like, but that's wonderful. I mean, as autistic people kind of say that, yeah, there are people who are interested, you know what I mean? I suppose that's what I want to start doing with Awesome Training, is setting up, because I know people are asking questions for referrals. This happens all of the time. And besides Eoin and a few other people I know, it's like, you're all booked up nearly, you know. It's like, where do we
and I have a waiting list, which is very frustrating, because I'd love to see everybody, you know.
And that's it. And it's just, you know, I suppose I want to set up a directory so people can go to Awesome Training.
Joanne's mentioning that there, actually, which is great. We're going to do that. Yeah, we will set up a directory. Yeah,
so that people know who's been trained by Awesome Training, and I suppose how much training they've got and all of that, because as I said, we do have that problem of autism awareness and autism friendly, and you know what I mean, where it's not maybe the best thing for people, and it's not meaningful enough maybe for people. And obviously on top of that, we do, you know, we train schools, we train businesses, we'll train anybody, basically.
That's it. That's a good slogan. That's a good slogan. We'll train anybody.
It's broad, but why not? You know, I mean,
and Dee says training for supervisors as well, who get stuck supporting therapists. So yeah, good, very interesting comments from Dee there. Thanks very much. And I think you're right on target with all of that. You know, that's the package that needs to be set up. It needs to be part of medical training, it needs to be part of psychiatrist training, not optional CPD later on. It needs to be there at the start, it needs to be there for therapists and their supervisors, it needs to be there for the psychiatric nurses as well as the psychiatrists, it needs to be there for the teachers and the educational psychologists, and yeah, you know, just everybody, you know, that remotely is supposed to be able to help everybody, and that includes autistic people. It just has to happen, you know. So yeah, we're trying to do our bit, but I suppose tonight is about just, again, stirring up our energy and stirring the pot and getting that all come, you know, riled up about that again and clear on what our message is, and then filtering it out as best as we can. So it's been a fascinating discussion, there's no doubt about it.
It's been brilliant. I mean, we could probably talk for hours and hours and hours and days and days.
Yeah, well, we know we can talk for hours and hours and hours because we've done it. But sorry, Nick as well is just saying, as a neurotypical therapist, we'd love more workshops on autism. Yeah, I mean, we have our major long course coming up. If you're interested in doing something shorter, Nick, just get in touch with me. info@autisminformedtherapy.com or info@owenstephens.com. Just send me an email and I'll tell you what we're doing next and when the next one's happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, I mean, like when I do those, shorter trainings for therapists, there's, there'll be about maybe 15 people attending. We nearly always get one or two people identifying as autistic or neurodivergent themselves, or at least thinking, hey, I have a lot to think about, and that's exciting in itself. But, I really want, people to, you don't need to be neurodivergent to learn about this stuff. Please, people don't think that, and I'm sure you don't, the people here tonight, but that's not what we want either. We get off ghettoized into, only the autistic therapists see the autistic clients. No thanks.
No, I mean, gee, that's another type of othering and discrimination,
exactly.
Isn't it? Like, no, it's like we should all be able to meet each other and our needs as human beings. But I suppose it's empathy, really. I mean, a lot of the stuff you're saying tonight, what I'm hearing from it is empathy, and just trying to find ways to let people empathize with each other when there are different ways of communication, and when we do have different backgrounds and cultures and different things, and it's facilitating that empathy, really. I mean, that's, I think, the essence.
I think that's a good word to finish on, probably. Yeah. Empathy covers a lot. Yeah. Diego's offering
empathy. That's what we can.
Yeah. Diego's offering you help with IT there if you need it. So
thank you so much, Diego. I always need help with IT. I didn't even know how to use Zoom 2 years ago. Now I'm like WordPress, Zoom, the whole shebang, but I always need help. Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. I suppose we've got to wrap it up because I'm kind of conscious of people's time. But do pop onto our awesome training website and have a look at all the different webinars. We do like weekly webinars on lots of different topics. We also have some material that Eoin would have recorded with us last year that's available on demand as well. And I suppose spread the message, about, I suppose, autistic people needing to be heard and understood, because it's creating a lot of problems for us as a community.
It's my website there, somebody's asking. So.
Owen, so yeah, actually I'll call it out for people.
So there you are, I've just put that up.
So yeah, it's autisminformedtherapy.com. So that's Owen, autisminformedtherapy.com. And my own one is awesome training, training.com. Brilliant. So thank you so much, Eoin. It's been fantastic. It's been a blessing.
Yeah, great as always. Really interesting and very lively, fascinating questions and comments.
Some great questions. I love it. It's been lovely not to have slides and actually just chat and be able to interact and get and see what people want to know. Thank you so much, Eoin. Thanks again for joining us. I'll talk to you soon. Everybody who's watched us live and joined us and been part of this, thank you so much. And as we mentioned at the beginning, Eoin, I think before we hit record, was the ripple effect of all of these things, like what happens after tonight's discussion, things we'll never even know about, but it's wonderful to I see someone saying hope for the future, and that's exactly what it is. So thank you so much, everybody. Good night. Thank you.
Take care, all. Thanks.
Bye.